So, better make this quick as we're being moved out. You can just about see the boys training away in the background. The main headlines always seems to be a roll call, and for those of you who were concerned, Ibo Konate was there, present and correct. But as always, training sessions that we get to see, only a little bit of a glimpse of what the boys are up to. The real meat comes from Arne Slot's press conference later, and I'll be there to give it all my review. Here we are for part 2 of what is going to be a Liverpool Odyssey today, and we have arrived at Anfield ahead of Arne Slot's pre-match press conference. But as it's a European game, we also get to speak to one of the players, and goalkeeper Caoimhim Kelleher will be before the press as well, so I'll be asking him a question. And then I'm going to be going back here later this evening because the Bayer Leverkusen manager is of a little bit of interest to most of us, so hopefully I'll be getting a chance to ask him a question as well. It's going to be a long night. We are back within the annals of Anfield for what looks like is going to be the last leg of a very, very long day. But obviously I had to come back. I'm not going to miss up the chance of asking the Bayer Leverkusen manager, who just happens to be a bit of a legend in Liverpool circles, Mr. Xabi Alonso, a few questions about his team ahead of the game. This will be the last bit I'll be doing from Anfield. After this, we'll be back to the lab to give you all of my thoughts on everything we've heard from Kelleher, from Arne Slot, and from Mr. Alonso. Wow, back in the lab at last after what's been a very long day building up to Liverpool's massive Champions League clash with Bayer Leverkusen tomorrow evening. I promised you a double dose of press conference review, and that's exactly what we're going to get. We went through all 4 of the people put up to talk today, and I asked them all questions, so you're going to get to see all of those questions, but there's something else that each of them said which I think is very interesting. So let's start at the beginning with Caoimhim Kelleher. Now, he got asked a lot of questions about his future, and predictably enough, he didn't really want to go into detail with those. I got the real sense from him that he had maybe itchy feet. There was a couple of times when he was quite pleased maybe to get going, and maybe thought that he wasn't going to have to answer as many questions as he did, but he did say some interesting things. One thing that I picked up on it, he said, is that the mood at the moment within the squad is good. Everyone's in high spirits. Everyone knows kind of the rhythms of the Champions League despite the change in the format. And it kind of struck me as something that's an interesting contrast between our title rivals of Man City and Arsenal, because frankly all 3 teams have had injuries to deal with. But whereas with Man City and Arsenal, you've often heard them talk about those injuries mainly in post-match press conferences after games that they didn't win. It's not really something you've heard a massive amount from Arne Slot or any of his players. They're not necessarily looking at the absences as a reason or an excuse to have poor performance. They believe in the squad that they've got. They've been together now as a squad for 2 years, so they believe in each other, and they probably understand that these guys can get them where they want to go. And sometimes it's a mentality thing. I think if you allow yourselves to start feeling sorry for yourself, or allow yourself to give you that excuse of injuries, then maybe that kind of creeps into performance. But there's been none of that in the Liverpool camp. They've been mentality monsters once again. Now, obviously, as I mentioned before, I asked Caoimhim Kelleher a question about his upcoming debut at Anfield in the Champions League in front of a big crowd. Here's what he had to say.
Hi, Caoimhim. You've played in lots of big games in your Liverpool career, cup finals, and obviously you had the Europa League run last season, but I believe this is going to be your first Champions League game at home in front of the Anfield crowd, because obviously you played in the Ajax game, but that was behind closed doors because of COVID. After the atmosphere, the game with Brighton on Saturday, how much are you looking forward to ticking another big achievement off in your Liverpool career?
Yeah, it'll be quite cool. Obviously, I've been here and experienced quite a few nights of Champions League. I didn't play obviously, but I was here. The atmosphere is always electric on European nights. So yeah, it'll be a special moment tomorrow, and one I'm looking forward to for sure.
As I said before, it's not necessarily a natural speaker in front of the camera, but you can tell he's looking forward to playing in front of the Anfield crowd. I mean, you mentioned the fact that he's been in and around Champions League games, so it doesn't really feel like it's new to him, but it's a different experience being in there between the sticks and hearing that crowd. So it's a really important staging post in his career, and another mark for his CV, something that maybe we'll be looking forward to adding to in the future. And obviously he's not thinking about next season or where he may end up, but he's smart enough to know that playing in the Champions League in big games like this is certainly going to do him no end of harm whatsoever. Next up was the manager, Arne Slot, and I think he probably knew what was coming, and he was in a good mood despite all of it. The first few questions were about Mo Salah and his future after the social media post. He said he's not seen it. He said he's not spoken to Mo Salah about it. And it kind of struck me that he was actually telling the truth. He was being jokey about it, but you could tell there was a real sense of truth in it. In fact, if he is going to talk to him about it, it's probably just to remind him that he's given the reporters an excuse to ask him the same question again. But I mean, it is notable his demeanour around this subject, because obviously it's something he's getting asked a lot, and I know that a lot of you out there are frustrated with the repetitive nature of the questions around it, and it would be very easy for him to get annoyed about it himself because he just wants to talk about football matches. But so far, he's been nothing but jovial, and whether or not this is his tactic, a disarming tactic to try and get everybody off the scent, or whether he generally doesn't care or just understands the rhythms of the journalist-manager kind of relationship, I think it's a good thing that it's not becoming a bugbear for him, although maybe it's going to encourage him to ask questions a little bit too more often. Speaking of questions, I had one for Arne as well. Let's have a look at that.
Hi, Arne. My question kind of follows on from that, actually. You mentioned post-match that you wanted Liverpool to start with the same intensity in the first half that they did in the second and get the crowd energised. But we've noticed in recent games that some teams are maybe taking advantage of the more aggressive press, like leaving players out wide in between the wide forwards and the full-backs to utilise the space. How important is it to strike a balance between maybe what the crowd want and then maybe what the opposition don't want, particularly in the team like Leverkusen, who have such great wing-backs like Ronaldo and Frimpong?
Yeah, but they have more than only great wing-backs. They have 11 very good players on the pitch. I think what the crowd wants is what I want and what our players want. We want to have control of the game. We want to be very aggressive without the ball. Maybe if we are not as aggressive, or then we are sometimes a bit too high, we still want to try. But if you're just too late or a fraction too late, or you open a certain lane, then they can play through you. The good thing is that I always see my players running back really hard to prevent the other team from getting a chance, because although I felt, and I think we all felt this, that Brighton was the better team in the first half, it wasn't like they had 3 or 4 open chances from open play. I think if you look back at it, we got the biggest chance maybe in the game in the first half, with Darwin Núñez. So that also shows me that even if they play through our first press, we are still able not to concede that many chances. But ideally, it's not only preventing them from playing through your press, but by having a very good press, you can also create your chances. It's probably something you really know really well here at Liverpool. So that is also the reason why we want to press that high. But then, yeah, against good teams like Chelsea, like Brighton, and like Leverkusen, you cannot have 1% less than, for example, the second half intensity we had.
Now, I really like this answer, not only because of his reaction to when I started talking about tactics. It was a little bit like, you noticed that as well, did you? But the things that I liked about it were that he wasn't looking at it as a difference between what he wanted and what the crowd wanted, despite the fact there were times when maybe it felt that way. He focused on the similarities, and the idea that we both want control, I think, is a really interesting one, because essentially that's true. Liverpool fans want us to be dominating the game, dominating the ball, and being on the front foot, trying to score goals. And control is an interesting word, because the way that we as Liverpool fans may look at it and the way that he as Liverpool manager looks at it, there may be different ways of going about it, but we still want to get to the same point. So maybe that's something that we can come together on. Now, there's no doubt the fact that Liverpool fans and the manager both want Liverpool to be aggressive without the ball, and that's something that is really evident. And when you see how the crowd reacts whenever there's a tackle, you could have heard it in the game against Brighton, the amount of times people behind me were shouting, get into them, get into them. That's exactly what they want. And the idea, obviously, that I put to him, that maybe that's also what the opponents want in terms of being able to play around the press. He didn't shy away from that idea as well, but what he focused on was the fact that once opponents have maybe been able to get out and play through our press, they haven't led to an avalanche of chances. He's been really talking about the work rate of his team and the ability to get back in there when they need to stop the chances. So even if plan A isn't working, they're still showing the desire and the determination to be able to stop it being a real problem. And again, this is something that Jurgen Klopp was really good at as well. He was aware of what to do or how important it was when his plan didn't work. And he wasn't necessarily someone who was perfection or nothing. Good evening, Mr. Guardiola. And I like the fact that Arne Slot is exactly the same, because, you know, Everybody's got a plan till they get punched in the nose. Well, Arne Slot's Liverpool, I've got something to say when they've been punched in the nose as well. He didn't shy away from the fact that Liverpool had been poor off the ball against Brighton and how important that part of the game is. So it'll be very interesting to see how we start the game against Leverkusen, because he reiterated, should I say, what he said in a post-match press conference, that he wants that intensity that we saw in the second half from the very beginning of the game. So we'll have to wait and see if he gets it. Now on to the Leverkusen side of the press conference, and first up, Granit Xhaka, who I'm very pleased that they put up for it, because really within their team he's the guy who's got the most to say. He's got the most experience of being here at Anfield and playing Liverpool, and that's what a lot of the questions, particularly from the English side, were all about. He gave a very telling answer. I think this was actually within the German side, but it was translated, that it's important to not provoke the crowd. Now, obviously, this may well have been seen as a reference to his former manager at Arsenal and the current Arsenal manager, Mikel Arteta, who very famously provoked the Anfield crowd a few years back by barking at Jurgen Klopp on the touchline and turned what was a quite calm, measured 0-0 into a 4-0 whooping. Now, Xhaka wasn't playing at that point, he was injured, but he was sitting there in the stands and he saw it happening and he knew exactly why it happened. So I'm not surprised that he'd be very keen to stress the idea that they probably shouldn't do that this time. Now, as I said, I did ask him a question. It was kind of along the similar lines about what happens when things don't go well for you when you're on the Anfield pitch.
Granit, you've been here quite a few times when there's been a fantastic atmosphere and perhaps some of the games haven't quite gone your way, sorry to remind you. But do you think that that experience will help you with going into this Anfield atmosphere, which could be massive again tomorrow?
I think so, yes, of course. If I have to share with the teammates to explain them what's going on here when you are on the pitch, I will. But in the end, everyone has their own feeling. How I say it, I had good memories, but as well bad memories here in the stadium. But tomorrow is a new challenge, new game in a Champions League against a very good team, and looking forward for that.
Now, as a leader and an experienced member of the team, there's no surprise to hear him say that he was going to speak to his teammates about the atmosphere and how to deal with it and what happens when you're in one of those washing machines, as Arteta calls it. But he also very tellingly mentioned the fact that that's no guarantee. I mean, you can talk about it, you can understand it, you can know what's going to happen, but once you're in it, there's no guarantee you're going to be able to deal with it. And he said that everyone has different ways of dealing with it. So once again, there might be a situation where they feel like they're prepared for the worst until it comes, and then suddenly they aren't prepared. If you pair that with the current trend of Bayer Leverkusen, who had quite a lot of leads in games that have let slip. I think Bayern Munich, I think Holstein Kiel, I think Brest and Werder Bremen, they were leading in all four of those games, and all four of them ended in draws. And when you consider where Liverpool have been recently, going behind and not losing, it's a very interesting mix to see how that plays out across the game. And finally, Xhaka's manager, Xabi Alonso, came in, and it's very, very clear to see that he's still very fondly remembered. He was asked a lot of questions about himself, his future, obviously the rumours around him potentially becoming a Liverpool manager, but also his memories from his time here as a player, his memories of the city, of the fans and all those things. And as much as he wanted to be respectful, because he is a very respectful man, he really didn't want to talk about any of that stuff. He was very, very much wanting to concentrate on talking about his team, the football and the game coming up. But he gave them all a little bit, gave them a few sprinkling of sound bites to be able to use in their copy. And I'm sure you'll see all those quotes leading most of the articles around the press conference. They're going to be coming out over the next 24 hours. But obviously, you know me well enough. I went in a different tack when I asked him a question.
Your teams have been known for being quite fluid when it comes to formation. Normally you have a back three, but away in Brest you went with the back four. Now, I suspect you're not going to tell me which one you're going to do tomorrow, but what comes into the consideration when you're making those decisions? Is it more about the form of fitness of your own team, or maybe the strengths and weaknesses of the opponents?
No, mainly our team, our players, what we need for the game, and after we have wide squad and all the players, they are on the boat. They feel that they can be part of it. They need to feel that they have to be ready for whenever game, and depending of the moment or the tactical approach that we will have, we work, and we try to prepare things, but always with many same principles. It doesn't matter is the system. After the game is fluid. You have to have a movement. You need to understand the moments as well, because you can prepare a great. You can here play 70 great minutes, but in 20 minutes it's gone. So you need to well prepare you mentally, emotionally, because that might happen, and we need to be ready for that.
Now, I think this was actually the most fascinating answer I heard all day. Not necessarily what he said at the beginning in terms of how he wanted to use the squad and make sure everyone felt like they were involved, and how important that was within the factor of how he's going to set up his team and formations. I think it was the line he said where you can have a plan for 70 minutes and then suddenly it goes like that. So you have to be prepared. You have to be dedicated to be able to see the game through. Something that obviously happened very recently in a Liverpool game. In fact, just Saturday's just gone. I imagine Xabi Alonso probably sat his squad down and showed them Saturday's match of the day, because exactly that happened to Brighton. Now, this is the benefit that he's going to have of being within the Liverpool sphere for a long time. He understands how quickly things can change. I mean, obviously Istanbul is probably the keenest example of that, even though that didn't really happen at Anfield. But it's something that Liverpool have been synonymous with since those days, since long before those days. You can feel like you are in control, you can feel like the game is in your hands, and suddenly it's gone. And he will know that better than anyone, and he will be stressing that as a real point of emphasis to all of his players over the course of the next 24 hours. In terms of Leverkusen's team news, there was some interesting news as well. Nordi Mukiele isn't travelled, nor has Martin Terrier, which presents Alonso with a little bit of a Frimpong problem, which is a bit of a mouthful to say. Because over the course of his time there, particularly this season, Frimpong has played in both right wing-back player position or as an attacking inside forward, you could say, on the right-hand side. And there are options that are gone on both of those. I'd add Admin Adli to that as well, another attacking midfielder. So the reality is that Frimpong could really play in any position. The expectation still, though, I think you expect to see him at right wing back and maybe Jonas Hoffmann playing a more advanced role. But I guess we'll have to wait and see. The big man was not giving away too much. And there you have it, a bumper edition of the press conference review. Thank you all for sticking with it. I'm sure you'll agree it was worth your time. There's going to be more coverage of the game itself. I'm going to be up there in the gantry alongside all of the radio colleagues watching the game from up there. So expect another article on my Substack over the next 24 hours talking about the game. I'm also going to be recording a show with the great Josh Williams, another episode of Distance Covered, also out on Substack, so keep your eyes peeled for that. For now, I'll see you soon.